I'm thinking that as we start our recordings
Mhm.
of the False White Gospel by Jim Wallis, Rejecting Christian Nationalism, Reclaiming True Faith, and Refounding Democracy, that we'll put the links to purchase this book in the section underneath. And so what I'm hoping that we can record today is the foreword, The Love Battle to Save the Soul of America, is written by your friend and colleague, Eddie S. Glaude Jr.
And by the way, not a personal friend. So uh, I wish he was, but he's not. So
I am just aware that you have been a part of discussion groups with him, and with your role, it makes sense that you're part of the facilitating group when he does that kind of work at Sinclair.
right.
The love battle to save the soul of America. We are in a battle for the soul of America, but it is not, and has never been, simply a political battle. Ours is a moral struggle over who we take ourselves to be and what kind of country we want to live in. The moral question sits at the heart of our troubles today. It has been a central question since the founding of the Republic, and the moment of crisis when it felt as if the entire experiment would fall apart. On the eve of the Civil War, in his first inaugural address, President Lincoln understood the moral gravity of the moment. I am loath to close, he said. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained it, must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union. When again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature. Lincoln's words were a hopeful and desperate gesture, an appeal to those preparing for war that they would, instead, reach for their better angels and not secede from the Union. But at the heart of the American experiment, and Lincoln understood this intimately, rested a distorting and disfiguring view that some people, because of the color of their skin, ought to be, dare I say, must be, valued more than others. This view took shape in the context of a country committed at once to the ideals of democracy and to the evil of slavery. And that contradiction threatened to rend the soul of the nation. But the break had already happened. Before one cannon was fired at Fort Sumter, American Christendom had split over the issue of slavery. The Civil War had already begun over the moral question of holding another human being as chattel. Some Christians found religious justification for their greed and prejudices. Others condemned the practice. Those held in bondage and who bore the brunt of the cruelty of slavery dared, as the theologian Howard Thurman said, to redeem the religion profaned in their midst. This dramatic split would come to characterize the nation's religious landscape as race segregated the idea of the beloved community, and many were willing to die and kill to maintain it all. Frederick Douglass would put the point more poignantly. The slave auctioneer's bell and the church-going bell chime in with each other, and the bitter crisis of the heartbroken slave are drowned in the religious shouts of his pious master. The historian David Willis has insisted that one way to tell the story of American religious history is through this encounter of black and white, an encounter that occurred within the context of a slave system and the world it created that colors how we see each other and how we imagine being together. And here we are, over 160 years after Lincoln's first inaugural address, still grappling with the moral question of who we take ourselves to be, and how a certain distorted view of Christianity sanctifies our hatreds and fears. Will we reach for our better angels? Jim Wallis has spent a lifetime bearing witness in the face of injustice. He has worked diligently to organize faith communities and leaders to cast away the idolatry of race and to live the gospel. In this powerful book, The False White Gospel, he takes on the latest American expression of white Christianity. Without mincing his words, he understands that white Christian nationalists have clothed their hatreds in the garments of their faith. They sacralize power and worship at the altar of autocrats who all too often profane the message of Jesus. These are the descendants of those who so easily reconciled Christianity with slavery and Jim Crow. But Jim Wallis, as he has always done, refuses to sit by silently as these forces hijack his tradition. He understands that this moment is a moral crisis that cries out for courage and conviction, and especially for Christians to defend their faith by finally leaving behind the idea that some people ought to be valued more than others. And he provides the tools for the fight with scriptures and commentary that guide our hearts, our minds, and our actions. His is an invitation to us all to engage in the moral battle. In February 1960, James Baldwin spoke at Kalamazoo College in Michigan. The talk would be published the next year in his book, Nobody Knows My Name. It is a fascinating meditation on the idea of America and the so-called problem of minorities. With typical insight and power, Baldwin insisted that what we really have to do is to create a country in which there are no minorities for the first time in the history of the world. But for me, it is how he arrives at this piercing insight through an interrogation of the role and place of Black people in American life and our view of God that speaks to the power of the false white God. He wrote, "The role of the Negro in American life has something to with our concept of what God is. And from my point of view, this concept is not big enough. It has got to be made much bigger because God is, after all, not anybody's toy. To be with God is really to be involved with some enormous, overwhelming desire and joy and power which you cannot control, which controls you. I conceived of my own life as a journey towards something I do not understand, which in the going toward makes me better. I conceive of God, in fact, as a means of liberation and not a means to control others. Love does not begin and end the way we seem to think it does. Love is a battle. Love is a war. Love is growing up. God cannot be shackled to the evils of white supremacy, nor imprisoned in communities that claim him as their possession. Baldwin insists that to be with God involves something more expansive and evolving, that it is in the going towards that we grow and are made better. Jim Wallis preaches this every day, and in this book, he calls the nation to grow up, and he calls us all to fight the love battle to save the soul of America. Eddie S. Glaude, Jr. I apologize for the jackhammer in the background and the sounds of construction and the ringing bells and so forth. I am in the heart of downtown Lebanon today, so this is what we have going on. But powerful, powerful writing.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that really stood out, there were multiple things that stood out, but one of the last things that stood out was him talking about this concept of love, which seems to be at the heart of Christianity, yet seems to be absent from what a lot of people are promoting. When I read about Christianity, when I read about Christ, he is talking about love, loving your neighbors, even if your neighbors aren't like you. Loving your neighbors, even if they're gay and Black and um, uh, they're Hindu and or Muslim or whatever else. It says love your neighbor. And it's one of the things that is disturbing me is that there seems to be an element of our population that professes Christianity that's forgotten that central message of Christianity.